So anyway, our first speaker this morning, as I think I've already intimated across the weekend, but I first met him, I believe it was 8 years ago at AV4. Yeah. Was it AV4?
Yeah.
Two. Then it was 9 years ago. Oh my gosh, doesn't time fly?
Heathrow.
Yeah, Heathrow. Well, AV2 and 4 were at Heathrow. Oh. But anyway, whether it was AV2 or AV4, so it was either 2009 or early 2010. And this gentleman came along with his good friend, Dave, who's sitting here in the audience. And I sat down with him, and he introduced himself as Detective Constable Jon Wedger of the Metropolitan Police. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And you are here because? Anyway, he sat me down, and the account that he shared really had my jaw on the floor. And I said to him, you know, I thought I'd lived a fairly full life, but there are some things that clearly I have been very sheltered from, thankfully. And, you know, it is really with great admiration that I hold the people who fight this particular cause, the cause of trying to expose systemic paedophilia. And I said to Jon at the time, I said, well, look, you know, if I hold another event like this, AV2 or 4, whatever it was, I said, you know, would you be prepared to share your experiences? And he said, I can't. He said, I can't. He said, you know, I just can't do that while I'm on the payroll. And over the next 8-9 years, and as he will share, his life was tough. So, you know, life exposing this kind of material is tough in of itself, but imagine what it's like when you are part of the establishment and you are on the front line, on the payroll, within the establishment. It's not a pleasant experience by any stretch of the imagination. Well, here we are, 8 or 9 years later, and Jon is off the payroll, and he's always maintained very good connection with UK Column, and rightly UK Column gave him, you know, the platform once he was actually, well, I think in the first instance when you're still on the payroll.
Yeah. It was unexpected when that went out.
Yeah. Take my name out, but it accidentally slipped in, I think, didn't it? Anyway, but so I am absolutely delighted, if you take my context, I'm delighted to be able to welcome to the AV platform at last, former Detective Constable Jon Wedger.
Thankfully. Cheers, mate. Is it coming out okay? Some people may know who I am and what I've done, and there are others may not. And there's been quite a bit that's gone out recently on the internet and the UK Column. And it's sort of much of a repetition. But this thing is evolving, and each month something else happens. So there's so much that I'm going to go over old ground, but also there's so much new stuff that was coming. And it was yesterday that I sat in here and listened to David Noakes when he was here, and I looked at him and I thought, I know all the fear and anguish you're going through because I've been there. And like victims and survivors of abuse, when you whistleblow, one thing happens, you stand alone. No one stands with you. And it's a very, very lonely place. What I'm going to be talking about is a very emotive subject, and it may affect or have affected some people here. I have no need to be graphic and explicit, but I need to present my narrative. So I will be talking about the dynamics of how this system works and also how this system has failed. And really, when you look at it, it's deliberately failed, and on so many levels. I joined the police in the beginning of the 90s. I had no intention of joining the police, but I did. It was my sister sort of got me to fill out the forms, and I filled them out, and I just passed everything, and I went off to Hendon, and I was sent out to the streets of southeast London. And I went to quite a rough, violent part of London, and I had a bit of an epiphany very, very early on in my service, because part of the policing duties that you work as a jailer, and that is to cater and care for the prisoners in custody. And back then I never used to smoke. And someone said to me, you always have a packet of cigarettes He said they're a key to a door. People talk when you give them a cigarette, and a lot of people are, get a lot of heroin addicts coming in, and it will placate them. So I bought some cigarettes, and the stress of the job, I started smoking them. But I always remember there was a fella, he was similar age to myself, and he was in a cell, and he was a heroin addict, and he was in for shoplifting, like many of them do. They've got to fund their lifestyle. And with the men, it's shoplifting. With the women, it tends to be street prostitution and shoplifting. And I said to him one day, come and have a cigarette. And I said, what's it all about? Why are you on heroin? And he turned around and said, listen, if you'd have had my life, you'd be doing it as well. I said, well, tell me. And he then recounted his story in the care system and the abuse he endured from day one right the way through his life. And he said, it was as if I had mug written on my head. Everywhere I went, I got abused. And he said, and the heroin, like the drink, like everything else, blocks it out. And it was at that moment I realised that this lifestyle and these recidivist offenders are actually victims. And the unit that would deal with child abuse was the child abuse investigation teams. And it was always seen as a woman's job. And it was always they were always incredibly overworked. It was poorly managed, and it was very, very poorly funded. I wanted to become a detective. I didn't like wearing uniform. I didn't like being part of a group, and I liked how detectives behaved. A lot of them worked on their own, and it really appealed to me. And I did very well. I had a really good career. I became highly commended. I got 9 commendations. I got 3 service medals, and I was doing very, very well. And I progressed quickly into the CID, and from there I progressed onto specialist units. And what happens then is that you end up in a very, very enclosed environment, and the police service is heavily compartmentalised. So someone sitting on the first row will have no idea what someone sitting behind them is doing. And I ended up on a unit, and I was asked to look into transient paedophiles, and the Sex Offenders Registry Act had just come out in 1997, and they were losing sex offenders. They didn't know where they went. So they said to me, look, we know from intelligence in the prison service that there's probably about 2 sex offenders in London that are transient, and we believe they're living on canal boats. Can you look into them? And there was a thing that I used to study a while back, and it was called geographical profiling. There's always a reason for everything, Things don't just happen by chance. Everything has got some sort of thought pattern behind it. And so I was looking at the canal network and trying to work out why, and it was quite apparent that they're sort of on the fringe of society. There was very much an alternative culture living there, very much a hippie lifestyle, and kids like canal boats. And at the time, the BBC had this programme, Rosie and Jim, with these 2 little dolls. And one of the things, they were very good in as much as I was privileged to work with a very wise old seasoned detective who had been on the paedophile unit since its inception, and there was nothing he didn't know about paedophiles. And combined, there was also a criminal profiler which would help out with stuff. And he just said to me, it's really, really odd when you start dealing with the sex offenders, because any other policing, if you do really good, you move forward very, very quickly. But in this game, he said, it's the opposite, total opposite. And he said, if you ever start looking into things and you become very good at it, they'll shut you down. And they'll shut you down straight away. And he went on to tell me about a very prominent MP that they had twice, and on both occasions, their funding was withdrawn. But he also used to tell me about things to look out for when you're in the houses. And there was bizarre things. There would be, like, in the houses, there was one, the picture of the crying boy. That was quite synonymous during the 70s. There's another one of a fireplace with 2 children stood facing the fire, and they're naked. And it's if I was to show you on there, you go, oh yeah, I've seen them. They're really crass sort of old paintings, prints that would appear. And it was very subtle things that would appear in during the search they told you to look for. And with the canal boats, it tended to be things, anything that would lure children. And the Rosie and Jim dolls. The other thing was a Boy Scouts fleur-de-lis badge they were put in there. Because if that's anywhere, Boy Scouts know that they can go as a place of safety. But it was the opposite. Action Men, they'd have Action Men you know, and you'd see it. And I think if anyone ever saw Sun, Sea and Satan by Pie Mash Films, Bill picks out these two dolls in the front garden. And I actually went to see Bill and I said, you know, you're bang on. That's exactly what they do. So they said to me, look, there's 2 sex offenders. If you can find another 2 in the next 3 months, we'd be really pleased. You know, you just do what you want. Any resource you want, you can have it. Well, by the end of the month, I found 90. And some of these were so high risk factor that one of them, he'd been allowed to roam free, and his intention was to capture a boy and dismember him. And that was found in notes. So this was how powerful they were there. And they were targeting also special needs kids, because they would take them out on boating trips and things like that. And it was just unbelievable. And this fella said, look, if a man wants to chat up a woman, he'll go to a nightclub. If a paedophile, they'll go where the kids are. And the other strange thing with sex offenders, a lot of them had no previous convictions. So it broke the cycle of what criminal profiling was. You get like this college of criminality. It starts off when they're younger and progresses right the way through their adult life. And I'm going to go on to that, and I'm going to go on to the reasons why that occurs. But with sex offenders, it's different. A lot of them have no previous convictions. But if they do, it tends to be for deception, because deception is a very intelligent crime. And it shows the thought process behind them. And also, they will have their incubation period, that they will be very patient. They could wait months and months and years and years and years until they've got themselves established and the child is at the right age that they're at. But one of them said to me, look, the other thing you need to know about them, they're what they call trisexual. And he said what that means is they're not just straight, they're also bisexual, but they're trisexual. They will try anything. And there will be no limit. They will have their specific age group that appeals to them and the gender that appeals to them, but if anything else is going, they'll have it. They'll have it. And it was, one of them was a quite infamous sex offender called Sidney Cook. This man, in his 70s, he was in a cell, prison cell, and the window was very high up. And they never knew how he did it. He would secrete himself in the alcove of this window, which was like 6-7 foot on a bare concrete wall. And he would get in there and he would masturbate 19 times a day in his 70s. You know, this is, you know, the sort of deviance. And of course, he worked on a fairground, and very, very similar to the canal boats. Anyway, so we had 90, and the next thing, this old detective said, listen, your name's getting mentioned in the corridors of the yard, Scotland Yard. And he said, just be careful, John. It's getting a bit too successful. And literally within 2 weeks, my commanding officer came and said, can I have a word? He said, we're taking you off the thing that's called Project Tanner. He said, we're taking you off it. And it was highly successful. We was getting inquiries from all around the world. It was just booming. And I said, why? He said, we can't afford to second you. And I said, well, that's nonsense. I said, come on, you need to credit me with a bit more than that. And he said, look, it's come from high up. We've just been told, shut it down now. So appalled was I with what was going on. And again, this was the first time I ended up in what was termed a conspiracy. Now, we've got to look at conspiracy. You know, it's given some sort of mythical status, but it's in statute law. You can conspire to commit armed robbery. You can conspire to commit murder. The only people that can't conspire in law is husband and wife. They're the only people in law. Husband and wife cannot conspire. So conspiracy is a very powerful part of our statute law, and is active all the time. So it's a nonsense when they denigrate that word. And I moved. I was told you can have any job you want, and I was just appalled. And for that little moment, I ended up seeing a glimpse of this underbelly in our establishments, in our institutions, in our police force, you know, and it was horrible. I then moved on to a very, very good job. It was the Clubs and Vice unit. And it's got quite a notorious history within the police for corruption. And there was Operation Countryman was set up in the 70s because of the vice officers stealing so much money off pimps and things like that. So it was quite a heavily monitored unit, and it was very, very, I wouldn't say elite, because nothing's really elite, but it was a real niche. And the crimes that you dealt with, they managed them. So anything of that sort of vice nature, which dealt with prostitution, which dealt with gambling, and dealt with certain clubs, nightclubs, late licenses, everything would go to them. And we had the job on the vice team was to deal with initially street prostitution, but also it covered brothels and trafficking and things like that. Now, I was on this unit, and part of our duties would be to patrol the streets looking for prostitutes and also juveniles at risk of prostitution. Now, the Street Offences Act, I think it's 1953, they knew the dangers that exist with children and prostitution, and they brought in a strong bit of legislation that any child in a red light area, brothel, everything has to be removed immediately, and they're to be treated as a victim. And they knew it, you know. So part of our briefing would be to look for the children. But it was a highly competitive environment. So we had 4 police teams that would work a night duty 1 week each, and they would compete with each other. And it would come to the point where they'd say, if you can arrest 100 prostitutes in a week, then you'll be the top team. And so that's all it was doing. It was a big number crunching exercise. And one day I found a young girl in a red light area in a central part of London. And she was clearly loitering, and she was off her head on crack cocaine. She was 14, and she was underweight and under height due to her lifestyle. And I took her in to police protective custody, and I was told, get rid of her, because she had scabies. The car would need fumigating. If I took her back to the secure room, she would have to be monitored, and then they'd have to fumigate the room, and then it would take the car off the road, and then their figures would be altered. They wouldn't get the quota that they wanted. So I was told, next time you see her or any others, just ignore them, tell them to F off. And this was how they dealt with it. So I then was asked to look into an allegation made by a 14-year-old girl that she was working as a prostitute. And I'm going to give you her name because she's dead now, and it's an absolute tragedy. Her name was Zoe. And like a lot of these children that are involved in that lifestyle, and I'm not denigrating anyone because I've dedicated my time and my passion and my love for them, you know, but they're horrors. You see these books on child abuse, there's a picture of this angelic little kid. They're not like that on the whole. These are kids that are tough. These are kids that can be vile. They don't want nothing to do with you. They will spit at you. They will swear at you. They really are a nightmare, but understandably. And this girl, she'd made allegations in the past, and she'd been ignored, and she'd made a third one. So there's obviously something in it. And I was told, go and talk to her. She's in the kids' home in Cambridge. Go up there and see her, but we think she's lying. Anyway, I went up to see this girl. She was quite anti-police. She was quite hardened. And my personal life, and I will say it because it's relevant, since the year 2000, I brought up 4 children on my own. The older 2 were not my children, and due to the mother's lifestyle, which was very chaotic, they were going to put them in care. One of my informants had been brought up in a care system, and he said, whatever you do, do not let your kids go into care. If they go in, they will be abused. And take it from me, John, that's what will happen. But it was never an option anyway. So I got through on one wage, bringing up 4 kids and doing the work I was doing. I never went to look for the children. I didn't want anything to do with kids because I had enough to deal with, but they found me. It was like a calling. There's nothing I could do about it. It was where I kept getting drawn. And they liked me, and they would talk to me. And this girl told me what was happening. She had been groomed. And another myth we're going to break here is that the one that was running this massive child prostitution was a woman. And the involvement of women is as equal as the involvement in men when it comes to paedophilia. You know, it's not men that wear milk-bottom glasses, live with their mum, you know, and that's sort of like the Thomas Hamilton type figure. You know, they need to change the face of what a paedophile is. Some of the people we were dealing with were good-looking young lads. We called them Romeos. We were dealing with Lithuanians, Kosovans, Jamaicans, every single culture and every single religion were involved in it. And this woman, her name was Foxy. She was a prostitute. She was a drug addict. She had a history of offending. And she had been grooming children for many years. And she was pimping them out. And she had a massive client network. And this little girl told me what had been going on. And she said, it's not just me, there's many others. She gave me other names. I went and met them. They did likewise. And in the end, these kids came forward. That we had to give them protection. We had to get them into secure units because there was a huge organised crime element to this. And whilst looking into it, there were 3 contracts put out on me, and they were real. And one of them was by a hitman, a Jamaican hitman, and that he was to shoot me when I left a court hearing. And it come from a credible source, and it was documented. And so very dangerous. And if that was for me, how must them little kids feel? But they would abscond, they would keep absconding. And when we look at these statistics, they're saying about how many children go missing from care. You know, thousands and thousands and thousands. Now I'm going to explain why that happens. They don't all just go missing and are sort of eaten by sex offenders, we're never seen again. What happens is they abscond, but they return. But the system knows about these kids. And I'm going to go on a bit later, the dynamics of all this. So it was very, very difficult inquiry, but it was increasing by the day. It was just getting bigger and bigger. These children aged from the age of 9 to 14. Some of these children were infected with HIV, with life-threatening illnesses due to their lifestyle. They had horrendous sort of conditions, sexual health conditions. They were all supporting Class A drug addictions, crack cocaine and heroin, which had been given to them by the pimps. And they were taken to a whole manner of clients. And people that were involved with this, we had a magistrate, there was rumours of high-rank copper, there was rumours of someone very high up in the music department of the BBC. They were going to big posh houses in the Arab sector of central London. They were being taken to hotels in Mayfair. And then they could also be taken to a backstreet crack house. And one girl said, I know that she gets paid, Foxy gets paid £2,000 for me for 1 hour. And then she said, another place I go, she gets given 10 rocks of crack cocaine for me. So these kids were being passed around, the pimps, the drug dealers and everything. And it was massive. A social worker got in touch with me and said, and this was in Croydon, and said, it's huge. And we have been telling the police about this for 10 years. They've never turned up for one meeting. They've ignored us. And they said, you've got to help us, John. These kids are dying and they will die. And they said, we believe we've lost quite a few kids due to illness because of this. And said, and she was just pleading with me. She was begging with me, please help. And again, I'm whistleblowing against the police. I'm not here to what I call plod bash. I'm not attacking the police. I think we've got a fantastic police service. What they've done to me is appalling, and I'll explain that. There's social workers. Again, I hear people say the child stealing state and all that. Well, there may well be an agenda, but there's good social workers. There's real people out there that have committed their lives to helping the vulnerable. There's good doctors, you know, and God bless all them. But there is this, like I say, an underbelly, this very well organised, and I would say it's probably the ultimate secret society. It's probably bigger than the mafia, what is connecting these people and how they operate and the resources they have, and it really is frightening. So I decided then, I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile everything. And I said to the small team I was working with, write everything down. Let's get everything written down. Get it all on an intelligence report so they know about it. We need to tell them. Nothing can be held secret. We need to tell them. So, and I was very mindful of my audience, which would be the senior officers. So I compiled a very concise, factually based précis of a report with all the strong points of how long this has been going on, and it's been going on for decades. I'd found reports of kids being found in red light areas going back 15 years, and nothing had been done. And it was like I say, it was very well established. So, and I also put the connections, how the grooming works, how many children we had today. It was increasing by the day, and also, you know, the ill effects, the after effects of it, and how the missing persons units know about it, the child abuse units. And I put it on there, and I'm going to sort of explain it in a second, you know, how this system works. And I submitted it, and I thought, I was proud of myself. And it was well written, and I was happy about it. Anyway, what happened next was, it was just a total paradox of what I thought would go on. There's a longer story to this, but I'm going to keep it short because there's quite a bit I want to go through. I was summoned to see the highest ranking officer that was on our command unit, who now holds one of the highest positions in the country. I cannot name this man because I'm suing the police, and I don't want to jeopardise anything. But this is all public domain, so I will talk about it, and I have done. And he brought me into an office, and he said to me, I've got to tell you something. He said, when I took over this unit, the former Detective Chief Superintendent sat me down and told me about the staff. And he said, he explained to me who I had to look out for, and what his words were, who was a wanker and who wasn't. And she said, you need to know, what you're taking on. And he went through the names, and then he said, now there's this 5 other detectives. He said, these are the cream. Whatever you do, you never lose this staff. And he said, you was number 2. And I was quite impressed with that. And he said, the former boss said, whatever you do, don't get rid of him. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. And I don't mean to sound conceited, and I was quite pleased. And then he turned around and he said to me, what the fuck have you done? I went, I beg your pardon, sir. He said, what you've exposed is going to F us, sorry I said it once, but past, present and future. This cannot and will not ever get out. If you mention a word of this, I personally guarantee you, you will be thrown to the wolves. If you mention a word of what's gone on, you will lose your home, your children and your job. Shut the F up. Now, I spoke with a solicitor for the government ICSA child sexual abuse panel, and he said to me when he heard this, he said he was probably just embarrassed about the reputation. So I said, well, let me say something to you. And I said, can I give you a scenario? I said, your work as a solicitor is not too dissimilar to that of a detective on occasions. And I said, what if you found a failing, a correspondent paper trail failing, or whatever it might be in your work, realising that a lot of the cases that you've lost, you needn't have lost. And you highlighted it to your boss. He went, yeah. And I said, well, firstly, you probably expect him to thank you for it, so you can now go on to win every single case. But if there is an embarrassment, again, it's going to be day one, and you start afresh, and everyone's a winner. I said, but what if he then sacked you, tried to get you prosecuted 9 occasions, and attempted to take your children off you? Do you not think that'd be a bit over the top? And he went, yeah, I sort of see where you're getting at, So, it was really bizarre, but why would anyone threaten me in that manner? And not only that, this man was a nice guy. I liked him and he liked me. And he said, I've got to warn you. I've got to warn you. And there was a woman sat in the office there who witnessed it all. And he said, if you ever say anything to anyone else, I and neither will anyone else ever betray rank. Fellow officers never betray rank, high-ranked officers. He said, if you put a complaint in or report as bullying, it will come to me and it will go in that bin. You need to understand you've got no idea who and what you're dealing with. So now for the second time in as many years, I was in the same situation, and it was all to do with the children. I then asked to leave the unit, and I moved to a child protection team, and there is a difference which I'll explain. And in the meantime, while I was there, the case that we had, it did go to trial. We had something like 34 kids, and it was reduced down to this one little girl, Zoe, who was found mysteriously dead shortly after the trial. It's appalling. It's shocking, and what a wasted life. And I said in that meeting, when he got threatened me, you'll never investigate another case when I leave. The woman that was in the office many years later met me in Scotland Yard, and she now become quite high up. And she said, come into my office. She broke down in tears and she said, John, I watched them bully you. I did nothing. You were right. They never investigated another case when you left. They never let anyone go near another case of child prostitution. And that little girl ended up dead. And I said, yeah, I know. And she just burst into tears. She said, please forgive me. So I was frightened. I had young children, and I can understand anyone protecting their family. And the ultimate thing is, you know, the whole Maslow's scale of survival is you keep a roof over yours and your families. But remember, I was told, oh, you lose your home, your children, and your job. I went to a unit in Haringey, the London Borough of Haringey, an inner city area, and it had the most amount of children's homes of any sort of borough in the country. It had 26 kids' homes. On my first day, they asked if I wanted a side job to look at. So, you know, there'll be an officer looking at female genital mutilation. We'll go to conferences and someone else would be sudden infant death syndrome. And I said, is there anything to do with kids' homes? I went, yeah, there was an officer that was liaison for the children's homes. But she left 2 years ago, had a baby, and never come back. And I said, oh, well, can I take that role? They went, yeah, it's easy. You go to a couple of meetings, nothing happens, and it's a bit of a jolly. And I said to this detective sergeant, I said, has there been any mention of child prostitution? She went, oh, no, we don't get any of that. And honestly, this is as the timescale went, I picked up the phone, I rang up a social worker, fax me, please, the contacts for the children's homes. Within 10 minutes, the fax came through with these children's homes, right, 26 of them. I picked the phone up, I rang the first number, and I said, this is who I am, no one's in any trouble here. I need to know how many kids you got. So we've got 5 children. How many of them do you lose at the weekend? And I said to the bloke, do you know what I mean? He said, I know exactly what you mean. He said, 3. I said, what's happening to them? Prostitutes, right? First call, it literally was that quick. By the end of that day, I'd found 6. By the end of the third day, I'd found 50. 50 kids working as prostitutes. Bear in mind, the other officer for 2 years didn't even find one. I found 50 in 3 days. I then held a meeting with all concerned parties, everyone who claims ownership for kids, NSPTC, Bernardo's, Connections, the social services for that borough and the neighbouring boroughs came to the meeting. And the first thing was said to me by head of children's services for Haringey, what the effing hell have you done? We got to now put care orders in for every single kid. I said, but you knew about these kids. They went, yeah, but while they've been doing that, they've not come to notice. So we've just forgotten about them. I then was told by someone who's got ownership for this, for Bernardo's, you're treading on toes, you need to back down. That's what was said to me. I was then summoned to see a superintendent at Scotland Yard, and he said, we've got an officer dealing with all this, you need to back down now. I contacted that officer, and I said, are you dealing with all these kids' homes? She went, well, I went to a meeting 2 years ago, and she said, I've not even met any of the kids. She said, no. So again, now for the 3rd time, and then I came in 2 days later and I was moved. So we're seeing this again. When we look at what's gone on in recent years, we've got Rochdale, we've got Rotherham, we've got the child grooming in Blackpool, Oxford, Luton, Aylesbury, all across the country. London is one of the largest urban conurbations in the Western world. It's got a population of 10 million, not one case has come out of London, not one case. If we go by what I was finding, there's going to be tens of thousands. Rotherham, a tiny little town in the northwest cluster of the UK, small ex-steel working town, 2,000 children were prostituted out that little town. You know, now what happened then is, I'm going to show you now how this system fails, and then I'm going to explain my whistleblowing. So, if you can't see at the back, I will do my best. Now, there's 2 reasons why this is covered up, and this is what I found, and it's not just me, because now I work with other whistleblowing cops. I've brought us all together, and all our stories are the same. The quite popular one at the moment, Maggie Oliver, the girl from Greater Manchester Police who was on Big Brother, and she's also was the subject to the BBC drama 3 Girls. Maggie got in contact with me when she knew that I'd whistleblown, and her story was exactly the same as mine, identical to mine. You couldn't get cigarette paper between the differences. It was just, they just meshed. And she said, John, they're going to nick you. They're going to do you for gross misconduct, and it'll be data protection violations, right? And they'll nick you, they'll put you in prison. That's what they want to do. That's what they try to do with me. There's a fantastically brave man called Lenny Harper. Lenny Harper was the commanding officer in Haute de la Garenne, Jersey. And he said exactly the same. But he said something more poignant. He said, the tentacles of this will go right to the heart of the establishment. There was a massive link with what I was dealing with organised crime. Gangsters were procuring children. There was links with these gangsters and corrupt coppers. We've just seen it. One of my other whistleblowers in Manchester, he said the gangsters there were getting the kids and they were tied into high-rank coppers. And he said the one you've got to look out for is this man, Dominic Noonan. A big crime family in Manchester, the Noonans, and Dominic Noonan has just gone down, I think, for 7 or 11 years for abusing boys, and had been doing so for many, many years. And it just meshes. This is the side of it they will never admit. But there's also a procedural failing in this system, and it's been going on for generations, this. Now, what you'll have a little kid, and we're going to stick with a girl because on the whole it is the girls who get picked on, but there is boys as well, all right? This girl is known to social services. This girl is a regular absconder from care. This girl is working as a prostitute, and she'll be on drugs, and she's probably not a nice person to know. You know, she's probably quite tough. She will go missing from that care home. That care home will have to fill out a missing persons form, which will then be instantly faxed through to the police, who have a missing persons unit. That kid is now a missing person, hence all these missing children, right? The police are meant to go looking for this kid. They're also, when they get her, meant to debrief her and find out why she's gone missing. There's obviously alarm bells ringing that she keeps regularly missing. She'll be classed as a regular miss-per. She'll be known to the police, and she won't be nice. So the police tend not to want to find her, all right? They definitely won't be debriefing her. And they know that on the Thursday, when the kid goes missing, she will turn back, probably on a Monday, and she'll be high on drugs, everything else. The kids' homes will know about her social worker will know about her, the police will know about her, and it will be documented by the police missing persons team, which would go under the sort of tag of the miss-per unit. So this little team, they'd say, right, sorry, I'll do it as big as I can for the people at the back. So they will know about it, and they really should be dealing with it, but they don't. Now, because this girl is working as a prostitute, it will have been flagged up, and that will then go to the vice unit. The bigger towns, London, Manchester, maybe Bristol, but they will all have a vice unit. They will all have red light areas. The prostitutes that I work with on the street, they're gone about legalising brothels and all that. It'd make no difference to street prostitution. It would make no difference. These are long-term drug addicts, and this is how they make their money, right? And this is what they do. And every one of them that I dealt with, every single one had come from the care system. Every single one. And then when you look at the care system, there's nothing caring about it. These children are a cash cow. From cradle to grave, they make money. They make money for their pimps and they make money for the government. At no point does anyone break the circle for these children. There are people that are paid phenomenal living wages to intervene and deal with this, yet they don't. These kids will be known to the family courts. Nothing happens. They go into care. These care homes were getting £2,000 per child per week. 5 kids, that's 10 grand. That is big, big money. And they did nothing to safeguard them, and I mean nothing. And I said to the fella at the reception, what do you do? He said, well, they pick up the kids at the top of the road. He said, I've even got the number plate of the car. It's a red Seat. Picks them up every day. I know the name of the fella. Every day we're picking them up, and these kids were then being picked up straight to brothels. You know, these kids are then become the notice of the juvenile courts due to, you know, their lifestyle. And if they are now being sexually abused, you're going to have a lot of anger issues. You're going to have a lot of confused people. You're going to have people that are going to start to get emotionless. You know, there was one guy I was talking to, and I said to him, he watched his brother murdered in front of him, and they were all abused. And I said, you know, well, the fellow who did it, the devil will be waiting for him when he dies. He went, I don't believe in God. And he said, every time I cried, no one came. And I sort of got that, you know. So you've got a real toughness around them. And they end up usually getting involved in petty crime, but that crime will then usually goes on to have quite a violent element to it. So it'll go from theft then to robbery, and it will escalate and escalate. And when you look at the history, the criminal history of these kids, it is just, I say it like I said, it's like a school in a criminality. It just escalates and gets more and more and more and more violent, bigger crime and everything else. And all these solicitors, social workers, they're all meant to intervene. And then the kids go from the juvenile courts to the magistrates' courts. They go from the magistrates' courts to the Crown courts, and ultimately they go to the coroner's courts. And all along the line, people just make money out of them. No one breaks the circle at all. Our prison population, 75 to 80% of them had come from the care system. How appalling. 75 to 80% of people in the prisons are illiterate, on the category C level, illiterate. We've got almost a total population of people in prison that can't read or write to a good standard, or like basic standard. Anyone that has been in the care system is 4 times likely to be a victim of trafficking. So from cradle to grave, we're setting up to fail. We are setting up to fail. And of course, they end up committing these petty crimes. And these are the drug addicts. These are the shoplifters, the beggars, you know. And we don't deal with them. We deal with them as scum, really. And no one deals with them as a victim. And it is appalling. Everything will lead back to child abuse. And I'm going to sort of explain that after this, you know, how that whole mechanism works. These people work, each different compartmentalised specialist policing unit will just mainly deal with one bit of legislation. So the firearms teams will deal with a firearms legislation, drugs with the Drugs Act. These lot would be the Street Offences Act, and it would cover this girl nicely. She's meant to be taken in as a victim and dealt with properly. Right, so they're meant to go and pick her up, and they're meant to monitor him. What the hell's that? Sorry, I trod on that again. Right, so they know about this girl, and she'll be part of their briefings. Yeah, I've told you what happens when they find these kids, right? Get rid of them. But they don't, and their argument is, well, it's the missing persons are meant to deal with it. And the missing person said, well, Vice are meant to deal with it. And then Vice will turn around, which is exactly what they did, and what they did to a social worker. Well, the kids, it's subject to care order, that's a child protection matter, which then goes to the Children's Act. It's not a Street Offences Act, it's a Children's Act matter, right? So then you've got when people talk about child protection, these are the team you mainly sort of hear of. And they call them child protection teams, CPT, and there's different acronyms. The police love an acronym. But they'll work under the Children's Act in 1984, I think it is. Now, they're meant to deal with this because this kid is at risk and is at harm. And they're meant to step in and deal with it. But they don't, for the same reason all the others do. They turn around and say, well, you know, she's been pimped out. It's not intrafamilial. It's outside of the family, so the Vice are meant to be dealing with it. And they can all legitimately row out, right? Every one of them can row out and no one deal with it. And what happens is this kid gets left on her own. And she is the one that left to the wolves, you know. And back in, when was it, 2000, the Metropolitan Police brought over Mayor Giuliano from New York to preach to us about our failing criminal justice, our failing policing. And he brought with him this broken window theory that if there's an area of depravity, smashed windows, everything else, if you fix that, then it doesn't become a mecca for petty criminals who therefore don't bring in the drug addicts, the drug dealers, the drive-by shootings, boom, 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 boom. So just deal with this, get rid of them, clean this area up. But the drug addicts, why are they on drugs? They don't push the timeline back. Why is someone on drugs? Heroin is an analgesic, it's a painkiller, right? And it's not just physical pain it heals. It also does it to the mental and the emotional pain. When you trace it all the way back, you realise that the majority of these damaged people are victims of child abuse. Yet the child abuse units, having worked on many specialist units in my career, were the most overworked and underpaid. I worked on one which dealt with crimes against the state, as it were. It was anyone to sort of protesters. They would target protesters and infiltrate them and all this, and I was on that. And we had a car each. We had as much money as we could spend overtime. It was overtime galore, trips everywhere. I went on to this child protection team. There was 10 detectives. We had one car between 10 of us. We had no overtime. And on 2 teams of 5, on one of the team, 3 of them were alcoholics. One woman hadn't slept in her bed for 2 years. She said, I just fall asleep on the sofa with a bottle of wine, crying every night. And they're coming to work. I went in one day and a woman's got her head in her hands and she's just crying because they cared. They really cared. Now, Jimmy Savile got caught. Well, he didn't get caught. He got exposed circa 2012. And that was a major turning point for me because all of a sudden, I wasn't a madman. I've been saying this for a long time. Like I said, I went and hunted down Ian and told Ian. My mate Dave said, come on, we've got to go and speak to this man. So I went and told Ian I needed to tell someone. And it was only the alternate media that was really sort of doing something about it. You would see it allegorically sort of told in various films and silent witness programs, everything else. There would always be a hint to it, but no one had really addressed it to that scale as much as the Jimmy Savile thing. And there was police officers starting to speak out. So I decided to speak out. I made an appointment to see the corruption command, and a police constable rang me and I said, I can't talk to you. I need to talk to a high-ranked female detective. And they went, well, why? I said, that's my stipulation. I need to talk to a high-ranked. Anyway, after a little bit of to-in and fro-in, I got invited to Scotland Yard and I met with a high-ranked female detective. And she said to me, why me? Why have you asked to see me? And I said, because you can't roll your trouser leg up. And she went, oh yeah, I get that. And do you know, bizarrely enough, someone said to me, watch the film, the drama Line of Duty. And it was almost word for word. And that was 2 years after I'd said that. So someone's obviously, with almost identical allegation I'd made as well. So I got all the assurances, you know, this is what's going to happen. We're going to take your interview. We're treating you now as a vulnerable and intimidated witness. We're going to give you total protection. We're going to do everything right. I said, oh, brilliant, thanks a lot. And we're going to see this right the way through. And I said, there are witnesses to this, and it can be proved. So he said, right. So I meant to, under the codes of their operating practice, to get an update, a meaningful update every month. I never got one in 3 years. They then passed it on to the IPCC, who again, I would write to them and say, please can you update me? They wrote back to me and told me, please don't write to us again. If you do, we won't open your letters. That's what the IPCC said. And then what happened was, this attack on me started to occur. And I met up with Maggie Oliver, like I mentioned, and she said, you know, that they are going to come for you, they'll be digging. And then I started getting allegations of gross misconduct served on me, one after another. There was 3 main ones, and each one had 3 offences attached to them, and each one could have got me a prison sentence of 2 years. So you're then in this world of fear, and a copper's biggest fear is going to prison. It is going to prison. I started teaming up with victims and survivors of abuse, and I've worked closely for the last 8 years, not only within this forum in the UK column, but with a man called Bill Maloney. And again, hearing it from their side as well, what they've been through and how it affects their life. And even Bill Maloney said to me, I'll help, I'll work. So I'll work with you, let's work together. So I approached Scotland Yard and said, this man is willing to come and help you. Not only identify paedophiles, but tell you about the mythology, and he will get victims for you as well. And they went, yeah, we'll deal with that. Nothing happened. And what happened was that Bill and another man called Chris Fay, there was an attempt to prosecute them for perverting the course of justice. So I started getting these gross misconduct things, and it was for data protection violation, most of them. But they'd gone right through every single one of my emails. And what had happened, not investigating this crime that are, this corruption, malfeasance in a public office, nothing to do with that, but they went really hard for me. They did a Rolls-Royce job on me. And one of the things they did, I had a colleague of mine, we both did covert work, and he was what they call an infiltrator. He was an undercover officer, and he would do long-term undercover infiltration jobs. And he, like a lot of them, he went mad, totally lost his identity, didn't know who he was in the end, and had to leave. And he went to France, and he lost all his numbers, contact numbers, so he wanted to get in touch with me because he liked me, we were friends, so he sent me an email. And he remembered my police email address, and he emailed my police thing. He said, "How are you?" And part of his legend, as it were, was he'd live as a tramp. And whenever I used to see him on the street sometimes, he'd have we used to call it the purple bastard, a kind of tenant super in his hand, you know. And he said, "Let's meet up, let's have a drink. Let's go and have a drink. I'll bring the tenants." I said, "Well, you bring the tenants, and I'll bring the methadone. We'll have a cocktail." And that was the email, right? And it was what it was. Next thing, they want to arrest me for supplying Class A drugs. Serious. You know, and this is what they were doing. And the attack got bigger and bigger and bigger. And another strange thing, very similar to what David Noakes happening, my bank account was shut down. And that way shut my bank account down with no reason at all. The police then stopped paying me. I then started working with various MPs. And the policing minister at the time was a black man called Sir Mike Penning. And I went to him and told him what's happened and how they keep shutting it down. The IPCC wrote to me and said, "We've investigated the case, we're closing it now." We spoke to the 3 officers, spoke to them. They didn't arrest them, they didn't interview them, they spoke to them, they denied it, we're shutting the case. So they said, were you involved in covering up pimping the kids? No, okay, and that's exactly what happened. So the policing minister took it to the Home Office. The Home Office had a meeting and they said, we're going to have an inquiry into this, we're going to have it independently investigated. I was called to Parliament with all my paperwork and it was officially handed over. It was a recorded handover. Passed over, the Home Office then gave me a card and they said, "This is for our investigation team, 24 hours a day, you call that number, we will be there for you, someone will answer it." They went away. I kept ringing the number, nothing. No one answered. What I did one day, I got a throwaway mobile phone, we put a SIM card in it, and I sent a text message. I said, "Hello," I said, "I've just come out of Parliament, I've seen an MP, he's got on the train, I followed him, he's left some paperwork and a phone behind with this number on it. This number's one of the heavily called numbers on it. I think he's an MP, I think it's important paperwork. You need to pick this up, please give me a call." Within 2 minutes the phone rang. Yeah, and I just told him what he can do with his phone, you know. And then Mike Penning followed it up because nothing was happening. And they turned around and said, "We don't even know who Jon Wedger is." And he said, "You're joking, aren't you?" And then they turned around, the next meeting he had with them, they turned around and said, "No, we've lost the paperwork." He summoned both Bernard Hogan Howe to Parliament. He never turned up. He did the same to Cressida Dick, but in the end, he put a parliamentary clause that if she didn't, she'd have to go before the Home Affairs Select Committee. And they just wrote back. But he said, "They just ignore me, John. They just ignore me." So this is the policing minister who's answerable to Theresa May, who was Home Secretary at the time, and the police are answerable to all of them, yet they don't answer to any of them. I sat down with Cressida Dick in her office. It was meant to be me and her. I went in there, she was surrounded by 9 women in a table. And I don't know whether it's to intimidate me or what. And anyway, I sat down with her and I said to her, "Cressida, I'm going to tell you something now. I can get a child, I can groom a child, I can have sex with that child, I can get my friend to have sex with that child, I can pimp that child out. I can then get that child to get another child involved and do likewise, and then we can have a whole sort of pimping racket of young girls." I said, "And you've not appointed one officer, not one officer to deal with that." I said, "But if I leaned over my fence and I called my neighbour, and I said a racist word, right, just as the thing, begin with a P, and someone took a sharp intake of breath and I said, "But I've said that, I've just talked about having sex with young kids and no one's even butted an eyelid." And I said, you would have me arrested, you'd have me put on a register, I'll be homeless, I'll be ostracised in my community. How is that just?" And after that meeting, there was a greater attack on me. There was more and more allegations put against me. It got so bad, I had no money. I had absolutely no income. I was looking at face in prison. Last year, one of my children was involved in a devastating and catastrophic accident, and it was life-changing. He ended up in intensive care. And he wasn't expected to live. I had to go to this specialist unit, which was 100 miles from my home. I had no money. I was sleeping in my car. I got called one night by the hospital, can you get down there now, please? And I got down there, 2 consultants were there, took me to a room, and they said to me, we've lost him. He said he's been dead, but there is a heartbeat. We've got back, he's very faint, he's on 100% life support. Can you consent to us turning off the life support machine if there's no improvement in 2 weeks' time? I went, yeah, I can, I will. He said, we have done everything, but there is a faint heartbeat. I stayed by his side for 3 days. I told a colleague of mine what was happening. She was so incensed and upset by this, she took it to my commanding officer at the time and said, you've got to help Jon. This is what's happened. You know, this man is in such a state. He's done nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong. On the 3rd day, my son actually woke up and he actually responded. So the brain damage was okay. They actually genuinely believed that he had a miraculous, they actually classed it as a miraculous recovery. He opened his eyes. I told him I loved him. I went home. When I got home, there was 2 detectives waiting for me. The Metropolitan Police had reported me for child abandonment for leaving my 16-year-old boy home alone. So if you go back to what happened, they said you'll lose your job. I was now looking at losing my job at the very least, but going to prison on multiple charges. Your home, I had no income. The bank came twice round my house to assess it in respect to repossession. And it was only the woman from the bank had been in a care home herself, and she totally, understood. And now they're looking at taking my kids off me. The detective, when he heard my side of it, turned around, put his arm around me and said, you've been stitched up and we've been lied to. It's going no further, and just left. And again, I made a complaint and the Metropolitan Police turned around and said, we did it in your welfare. We were concerned for your safety. They will lie, and they will lie. I've now got together all the whistleblowers and we're now trying to change the law because the police have no protection whatsoever. We are not subject to any employment law, right? This problem is massive. It will underpin all criminality, absolutely everything. We've got to wait for my court case to finish, and then 3 MPs have got together and they're trying to get a parliamentary hearing to get this thing moving, to get this thing forward. And we want accountability for these senior officers who actually deliberately cover it up. However, they're not all like that, because one of them come and wanted to join our group, and it was a man called Mike Veal, who's a Chief Constable of Wiltshire. And he turned around to me and he said, if they can do it to me, God knows what they've been doing to you. He said, what do I expect? I said, they're going to come for you, Mike, and they're going to come for you hard. And they did, and they tried to stitch him up. And all 3 of us got together, we did a media release, and then they backed down on him. So we had this cohesion together. And I said, where's your attack coming from? He says, it's coming from the House of Lords and from the security services. And it is shocking. It is absolutely shocking. I was asked to give an address to a rehab centre, an alcohol and drug rehabilitation centre in Oxfordshire, and I went along, and I was asked by a man called Chris Lambriano. I don't know if anyone has ever heard this man. He was he worked with the Cray twins. He went away for the murder of Jack the Hat McVitie, and he turned around to me and said, look, come and give a talk. And I gave a talk, and it was total silence, and they were worried for my safety. And they said to me, we can't guarantee. There's been a lot of anger during the day. Every single resident turned up. And this one man stood up and said to me, you come here as a copper, we all hate the old Bill. And he told me a story of how he had been raped as a kid, tortured, gone in kids' homes, same thing had happened, and he himself become an armed robber. And he said, when I would raid the houses, I would torture the people, and I would torture them, and I wanted to kill them for what was done to me. And he said, I've got hatred in me. And he said, who's your backup? And I went, I'm on my own. I said, I've worked with Bill Maloney. He said, well, he's not here, is he? I went, no. And he walked up to me, big guy, big scar down his face. I thought, oh, he's going to knock me out. He put his arms around me. He said, now you got me as well. I love you. Burst into tears. And the whole room stood up and applauded me. And I said, you know, my lot would have had me swinging from a rope, and you lot have shown me nothing but compassion. And they were all ex-cons, every single one of them. And it just totally broke my heart. But, you know, this is what is happening. We cannot be blind to this. And the one thing, I'll finish on this because I know my time's coming to an end. Someone said to me once, they said, Jon, are you not scared? You know? And I said, well, let's talk about fear. When you take an oath as a police officer, you take an oath that I will act without fear or without favour. So you're going against your oath, right? So I said, firstly, they're going against their oath. They're going against their morals. They're going against what is right. And I said, secondly, let's look at that word fear. You're doing your job, right? What you've got to be frightened of. The real fear is that little kid in the kids' home that's getting a blanket taken from over him in the middle of the night. That's where the real fear is. So, you know, grow up, get over it and deal with it, you know. And I would just say to everyone, you need to drop the fear. Although it is crippling and it is painful and it hurts you, and it does. But you'll get through it, and these poor sods won't. They're little kids, you know. We can't ignore our youth. We can't forget our children. We just can't do it, you know. So, but that is it in essence, you know. And it's I've just finished a walk from London to Manchester to raise money, and if anyone donated, thank you. And that has gone to the Drug and Alcohol Centre, and hopefully I'll be looking at other ways to raise a few more quid for other children's charities and all that around the country. But you know, there's so much more I can go on about, but I've got my limited time. But thank you, you know, that is it. Oh. Thank you.
Come back up.
All right. Well, we got an encore.
You got an encore, yeah. You got another hour. Yeah. I think what Jon, it's taken 9 years to get you on the AV platform.
Yeah.
And it wasn't through lack of trying, was it?
No. You were a bit persistent, weren't you?
And we had many conversations, and I know it's the same with Brian and Mike and Patrick, and for every one of us, it was really, really tough not to say anything.
Yeah.
But we had to make sure that your safety was top of the priorities.
Well, what happened was I did this interview with the UK column, and I did it as an insurance policy. And I'll tell you what it was a woman called Camilla Batman-Gellich from Kids Company. Now, she was stitched up, and I know she was because I was involved with some of that. And she said, go and record your evidence now in case anything happens. So I did. And I did that with Brian, where it was to my shock when it ended up going live on air. And I said to Brian, what you done? He said, trust me, it's God wants it.
I think he was talking about Mike Robinson.
Yeah. But it did, that sort of went everywhere. And that was one of the other things the police served me misconduct for talking to the UK column. And it was quite funny because I was asked to go and speak to head of current affairs at the BBC, a man called Tom something, I can't remember, and I went there and I was just sort of going through and they was seeing what they could do. And he turned around to me and said, the UK column. I said, do you know about it? He goes, yeah, we follow it, we watch it every day. So, yeah, until we know about Brian, yeah, so. Yeah, in that way, yeah.
So now you're on a mission, but what we have seen here today firsthand is, the compassion, because to keep doing what you were doing despite the pressure, it's
crippling.
Absolutely, and it's showing the inherent compassion within your soul.
Well, it's a kindness of people. I mean, there was one group, a Christian group, raised money for me. That paid my mortgage. Bill Beaumont, the ex-rugby captain, 1 month paid my mortgage for me. And there was a group of Orthodox Jews in New York, New Jersey. They contacted me and said, look, we want to raise money for you. So they did. And they said, we're going to get someone to get in touch with you. He's interested in what you're doing. He listened to Brian's interview. And I get this phone call from a man called Francesco. And he said, an old man, a New Yorker, he said, look, I'd love to meet you. I was in the same situation myself. I was in the NYPD. He said, would you like to come and give a talk in Holland? I went, okay, I'll come. He said, I'll send you my details through. And his name was Francesco Serpico. It was Frank Serpico. And,
it's Al Pacino, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's him, yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the man doesn't meet the myth. He was a bit disappointed with him. But again, it just goes to show all the way, you know, they do follow you. And, you know, and again, all that money they raised, and it kept my family afloat. It really did. You know, and I did everything I could just to put, you know, food on the table. But it's humbling, Ian, doesn't it? As you know, when you end up with skint and everything else, it really brings you down, you know. So, but it's, we can't, like I said, we just cannot ignore the kids. We can't. We're going to suffer. Our society will crumble if we do it. And we're seeing it already. We're seeing it with the murder rates rocket and everything. And it'll all be attributed to it, everything. But,
so just make me 3 promises. 1, that you carry on doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
2, that you'll keep talking to the alternative media.
Yeah.
And putting out what you're doing.
Of course,
and
yeah,
number
yeah.
3, for God's sake, never appear on Big Brother.
No. Can you imagine it? Oh, dear.
Ladies and
Come on
gentlemen,
with me, Bill.
former Detective Constable Jon Wedger.
Yeah. So, cheers, Ian.